I'm Lindsay Boyer, and I specialize in teaching centering prayer with a very inclusive bent. I'm a spiritual director who specializes in working with people who are uncomfortable with institutional religion and who come from no faith affiliation or more than one faith affiliation or not even sure what faith affiliation they are. And so I hope that whatever happens today, you will feel very included. Whoever you are, whatever your beliefs or doubts, that you will feel included in the community of centering prayer. And this is a refresher which I offer to those of you who are not familiar with centering prayer. It should give you a good foundation. If you are familiar with centering prayer, and some of you are very long-term practitioners, I hope you will find this refreshes your practice. I always find it incredibly helpful to go back to the basics once again and just renew my connection with them, renew my sense of all of them. So we'll be going over them in a way that I hope will refresh you. For about 45 minutes, I'll be showing you some slides and talking about centering prayer. And then we'll practice for about 20 minutes. And then we should have plenty of time to offer reflections, answer questions, whatever comes up for you in the second half. And we'll have a short bathroom break in the middle. I have Parkinson's, so if you're wondering why I'm shaking, I'm getting very excited about being with you all. So that's why that's going on. So let's begin with a prayer. Loving God, thank you for the gift of this time together and for the gift of this practice, centering prayer, through which we may enter more deeply into relationship with you, the God of our understanding. Help us to learn to be still in your presence, that we may know you and come to trust that you love and accept us. Help us to grow in the gifts that you are offering us through this practice, that we may taste and feel our own basic goodness, a goodness that connects us all to each other and to you. Welcome all of us, whatever our beliefs or doubts, into your sacred and healing silence. Amen. So we'll be looking at how to enter into silence, renewing our connection with that silence. Okay. Are you all seeing one slide? I hope you are. If you're not, please, someone unmute yourself and let me know.
That's good.
Thank you, Jim. Let's start with a quote from Thomas Keating, one of the founders of centering prayer. Silence is God's first language. Everything else is a poor translation. In order to hear that language, we must learn to be still and to rest in God. So many of us are drawn to being still in the presence of God or in the presence of a mysterious something. And we have a sense that we can find what we're looking for in that stillness and in that rest. But we may not know how to do that. So centering prayer provides us with a method to enter into that stillness and silence that we may feel drawn to. Centering prayer comes from the Christian tradition. A number of Trappist monks noticed in the 50s and 60s that an increasing number of people were being drawn to Eastern meditation techniques, and they knew that there was a deep, long tradition of silent meditation in the Christian tradition, but to a large degree it had been lost and wasn't being practiced very much. So they went back to the Christian classics and they developed a very simple method of being in silent meditation based on Christian tradition, but that would be very accessible for people to learn. And it's based not only on some of the Christian mystical classics, but also on Jesus's saying in the Sermon of the Mount, when you pray, go to your inner room, close the door, and pray to your Father in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. But centering prayer can be of great interest to other people besides Christians. There are Christians who've been drawn to spending time in silence with God, and they haven't known that there was such a tradition, such a method, and so they can be very excited to discover that such a thing exists. Centering prayer can be very interesting to people who consider themselves Christian but might be uncomfortable with aspects of Christian dogma or doctrine and uncomfortable with the words of Christianity, but very interested in the experience of being with God in the silence. Centering prayer is also interesting to people who've been meditating in Buddhist and mindfulness traditions, sometimes in order to get away from their Christian upbringing, which has made them uncomfortable or in various ways. But those people often find that they start to miss the mention of God in those practices. That was my own experience. I meditated in the Buddhist tradition for many years. And I know many other people who have left Christianity for Buddhist meditation and found that very healing, but they end up coming back to centering prayer because God continues to be very present to them in their meditation. So centering prayer can be very helpful for people like that. It can be a wonderful method for people who are filled with longing for something but aren't sure what it is. It takes you into a connection and a relationship with the divine that goes beyond words. And it can be very helpful to those in the 12-step tradition who are seeking an 11-step practice. So whoever you are, whatever you're looking for in this practice, you're very welcome here. I think this picture says a lot without me having to say very much about it. It's a picture of Thomas Keating, one of the founders of centering prayer, giving the Dalai Lama a little kiss. Thomas Keating was a pioneer of interfaith dialogue, and it's quite natural in a way, since centering prayer takes us, even though it's a Christian tradition, a Christian practice, it takes us beyond words and beyond dogma to a place where we can experience God in a way that connects us with people of other faiths. We may have been brought up to think of prayer as thoughts and feelings expressed in words, asking for something or expressing gratitude, but that's only one of the ways to pray. When we say, let us pray, we're opening ourselves to enter into a relationship with God as we understand God. And centering prayer gives us a language to pray in silence, a way of praying in silence, so that our intimacy with God will grow and grow. And it's not just a mental process. We'll be talking a lot about what to do with our thoughts in centering prayer. But it's not just about our thoughts. It includes our entire being. And I'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to the method section. These are the 4 basic guidelines of centering prayer. Basically, this is everything that you need to know. It's very short, just what's on this slide. It may, if you start to practice and you feel confused, you may feel like you need more information. Well, that can be helpful, but it can also be helpful just to come back to these guidelines because they really do contain, in a very concentrated form, everything that you need to know. I think of them as a tiny little suitcase that you're taking on your trip, and it doesn't seem like everything that you need could possibly be in this little suitcase. But when you open it up, it's kind of magical that everything that you need is there. So we'll review these guidelines pretty carefully and unpack some of their richness. I'll just read them slowly. Choose a sacred word or a sacred breath as the symbol of your intention to consent to God's presence and action within. Sitting comfortably and with eyes closed, settle briefly and silently introduce the sacred word or the sacred breath as the symbol of your consent to God's presence and action within. When engaged with your thoughts, return ever so gently to the sacred word or breath. At the end of the prayer period, remain in silence with eyes closed for a couple of minutes. So we'll go over each of those carefully. The sacred word. If you're going to use a sacred word, you choose a simple word of 1 or 2 syllables. And it doesn't need to be a religious word. It doesn't need to be a word that has the perfect significance for you. In fact, in a way, it doesn't even matter what its significance it is. It's just a pointer towards the divine. You'll be using it as a tool. So just pick a short word that is comfortable for you, that doesn't stimulate too much thought or emotion when you're using it. And when you find yourself engaged with your thoughts in the practice, and we'll talk a lot more about exactly what that means, then you silently say the sacred word just to help you disengage yourself from your thoughts and return to resting in God. So it's sacred in the way that you'll be using it. Doesn't need to be sacred because of its meaning. So you don't need to worry too much about what word you use. It's just a symbol of your intention to be present to God in the prayer. And it's a way of saying yes to God. Some people think yes is the perfect sacred word because we're saying yes. But just choose a 1 or 2 syllable word that you feel comfortable with. Now, centering prayer is usually taught with a sacred word, and some of you may not have experienced this teaching on the sacred breath before, but Thomas Keating in Open Mind, Open Heart does mention the sacred breath. He doesn't go into very much detail about it, but my own teacher, David Frenette, goes into a lot of detail about the sacred breath in his teaching. And I've found that there are a lot of people who are very drawn to the sacred breath. So I always offer it even at the introductory level as a possibility. But it's used in a different way than in Buddhist meditation where you concentrate on the breath. We use it very much like the sacred word. We just touch the breath ever so gently with our attention whenever we're engaged with thoughts, and then let go of it again. So we're not focusing on the in and out of the breath. We're just touching it ever so gently with our attention without following it or changing it. And some people have found, one of the reasons I particularly like to mention it is sometimes long-term practitioners find that the sacred word kind of falls away, that they're not really even using it anymore, or it feels too harsh, it's stimulating too much thought. So it's kind of fallen away from their practice. And what they're really doing is they're using the sacred breath instead. They're just touching something ever so gently with their attention in order to disengage from their thoughts. So I like to mention this practice because I think it's very affirming for people who have, whose practice has evolved naturally in that way. And if you're a beginner, you may find that the breath feels more comfortable to you than a word. It's a very simple, natural symbol. It may feel less intellectual or religious to you, but it doesn't matter that one of them is not better or more advanced than the other, whichever you feel drawn to and comfortable with. If you haven't tried the sacred breath before, you might want to experiment with it today just for fun, but I'm not pushing it on anybody. The second guideline is basically in two parts. The first part of the guideline, sitting comfortably and with eyes closed, settle briefly, is about how to prepare your body for the centering prayer and assuming your posture. And by posture, I don't mean like in grade school or ballet or something that there's some perfect posture that we need to push ourselves into. It's just about finding a way to hold your body during the 20 or 30 minutes of centering prayer so that you can be alert and attentive, but not rigid. You want to be comfortable enough that you're not holding tension in your body and all seized up. But you don't want to be so comfortable that you fall asleep, which can happen. It's not a crime to fall asleep. It happens to pretty much everybody. But you don't want to encourage it any more than you need to. So take the time at the beginning of the practice just to do what is needed, kind of as if you were doing a guided meditation for yourself, just to notice, what can I let go of? Am I stable? Is there anything I need to adjust so that I won't have to start squirming around in the middle of the meditation? And when we do our 20 minutes, I will lead you into it and just make some suggestions to help you get settled. But I suggest that you do that for yourself too when you're practicing. It's very tempting, especially when you've been practicing for a long time, to just kind of plop yourself down and set your timer, and then sometime in the middle you realize that you're in some funny posture that's making you hold more tension than you need to, or that you've fallen asleep because you haven't really settled yourself properly. So just take the time that needs to do that right. Now, the second part of the second guideline is about God, God's presence. Silently introduce the sacred word or the sacred breath as the symbol of your consent to God's presence and action within. Now, I thought about taking this picture of Teresa of Avila out because I want this presentation to be comfortable for people, and somebody before the presentation began emailed me and wanted to know if there was a lot of religious imagery in my presentation. So I looked at this picture and I was like, is this gonna make anyone uncomfortable, this picture of Teresa of Avila? But I just want you to know that the reason I left it in, even though she's a nun, so she's dressed as a nun, which may be pushing some people's buttons. The reason I left this picture in is that I just think it's important to remember that there were a lot of women Christian mystics, which is very important to me, and they're part of the centering prayer tradition. And what she's saying in this quote is very important. All difficulties in prayer can be traced to one cause: praying as if God were absent. We'll be spending some time on what that means. As I was preparing for this presentation today and I was feeling a little nervous, I was thinking that you could apply this saying to almost anything. All difficulties in presenting can be traced to one cause: presenting as if God were absent. Or all difficulties in living can be traced to one cause: praying as if living as if your higher power were absent. So if you're not comfortable with the word God, just substitute what you are comfortable with in your mind as I speak. And ask yourself, what is really alive for you in your connection with the sacred, with your higher power? What is it that will free and enliven you in that connection? Because that's what's really going to help you in your prayer. Who is God for you right now? And it could be different every time you sit down to pray. It's really helpful. You're not going to be thinking about this question while you're doing the centering prayer. It's just something, when you do your posture, you've taken your posture, then you take a moment to just touch in with your sense of the sacred, to make sure that you feel that connection, that aliveness. And you allow yourself a great deal of honesty and presentness in how you do that. What is real for God, about ultimate reality for you right now? Is it a sense of mystery, sense of gratitude, community, justice, presence, absence, emptiness, darkness? You may be bringing emotions to your sense of God that you are not comfortable with, but you can allow those into the moment that you take to connect with God before your prayer. The anger that you're feeling, the disappointment, confusion, all of that can be allowed into your prayer. Now, if your mind is going blank and you don't know what this part of it means for you, or you have a lot of bad associations and you don't want to go there, it can be very helpful to remember a moment when you experienced the presence of the sacred. When was a moment when you felt a sense of oneness, a sense of aliveness? You felt the presence of something larger than yourself in a surprising way, in a vivid way, in a transformational way. A moment in nature, with your loved ones, with your child, looking at a flower, listening to music, creating art. Whatever it is, just take a moment to taste that and feel it. And just let it infuse your prayer time. You're not going to be thinking about it during the prayer time, but if you just touch in with that sense of something, the deepest meaning of your own life, your own connection to something that has a lot of power for you, you can allow that to enliven your prayer time. And that will help you to make the time to do this prayer, which it can become a duty and just something you're doing. You're checking it off your to-do list along with buying the groceries and doing the vacuuming. But if you have this sense of the divine calling you, that's more alive for you, whatever it is, that can be something that really helps you to make the time to do this prayer, to find your way of contacting God as you understand God. Okay, this is the most confusing part about centering prayer. When engaged with your thoughts, return ever so gently to the sacred word or breath. What's confusing about it is that you always have thoughts. That's completely normal for you to be having thoughts. Thoughts are inevitable. If you weren't having thoughts, you might be dead. They're just a part of you and they're going to be going by. But when you become engaged with them, you use your sacred symbol to just gently disengage yourself again. Now, thoughts is a little bit of a confusing term too, because it includes all kinds of things that are not so much in your mind. It includes all of you, body sensations, emotions, memories, and really anything that you're experiencing during the time of prayer is included in this category of thoughts. And it's all right for it to be there, but you just don't want to become overly engaged with it. I recently gave a workshop on centering prayer in the body. And when I presented these slides, I took out the word thoughts and I just put a line and I said, whatever comes up, because I think if we use the word thoughts, we tend to think of, just our heads and our minds, and our whole idea of centering prayer starts to become more cerebral. But it's really about all of us. And the thoughts, we're not trying to avoid the thoughts because they contain what needs to be healed. This centering prayer is a very healing process, and God's action and presence within is going to be causing to happen within you what needs to be happening. And so when memories and feelings and sensations come up, that's part of the process. We surrender to that and participate in it. And the silence creates a space for that to happen. We just don't want to become distracted by thoughts so that we follow them. We just allow that to happen without following it, which is it's an unfamiliar process. It takes some getting used to. It's a practice, and we have to practice it in order to learn how to do it. And we don't worry about the fact that we may have to return to our sacred symbol, our sacred word, or our sacred breath many, many times during the time of prayer. That does not mean that you're a failure. It's just part of what you're doing. You just return as much as you need to in order to disengage from your thoughts. Thoughts are not an interruption to this prayer. We let them come, we let them go. Notice how you're using your sacred symbol. Are you using it like a hammer to try and pound your thoughts back in there, or like a knife to try and cut them off? There doesn't need to be anything violent or aggressive or hostile about how you use your sacred symbol. You just use it ever so gently, remaining gentle and friendly towards your thoughts. And you try not to become too emotional about it, because that's just a waste of energy. So you don't need to beat yourself up when you notice yourself becoming engaged with thoughts. There's a story about how when the guidelines were being developed, at first it said, return gently to the sacred word. And then Thomas Keating came running in and said, stop, stop. I think we need to change it to ever so gently, because you really can't emphasize the gentleness of the prayer enough. We have such a tendency to be hard on ourselves and to think that in order to be good people, we need to be scolding ourselves. But that's not a part of this prayer. You just are ever so gentle with yourself. Now, the fourth and final guideline is the one that is most likely to be ignored. At the end of the prayer period, remain in silence with eyes closed for a couple of minutes. It's so tempting, if our phone has been ringing and we have a lot to do, to just, the timer goes off and just leap up and go rushing off. But this guideline is really important for bringing the prayer into our lives. If you're not seeing a lot of fruits from your centering prayer, it's probably because you haven't been spending this time of transition, just sitting there with your eyes closed for a couple of minutes before you go rushing off into life. And David Fournette, my teacher, gives 5 little suggestions for how you might use that time. You can just rest completely, letting go of all effort. You've been letting go of thoughts, but now you can just let go of everything. And when you do that, sometimes it can be a helpful diagnostic tool if you notice that you're letting go of some effort that you were making in the prayer that you didn't need to be making in the prayer. You can learn from the feeling of resting completely. Oh yeah, I was tensing, I wasn't being gentle with myself, and now I'm learning from this feeling at the end of the prayer. I can be even more gentle. You can just slowly come back into your sense perceptions and start to notice the things around you. You can dedicate the prayer period to a person or concern. You could visualize yourself bringing the prayer energy into some activity in your day, especially if you have something challenging coming up. You could imagine yourself bringing the prayer with you into that activity. Or you could say the Lord's Prayer or the Serenity Prayer or any beloved prayer to just gently transition out. It doesn't really matter. You don't have to follow these suggestions. It doesn't matter how you do it. Just ask yourself, what is your way to make the transition so that you're not leaving the prayer behind on your chair or your cushion. You're bringing it with you into your life. What is your way of doing that? What centering prayer is not? There are a lot of common preconceptions. They're very natural preconceptions because it's an unfamiliar activity. It's hard for us to understand it at first. So we think at first that it might mean having no thoughts, making the mind blank, feeling peaceful. It might make you feel peaceful. It might make you feel not at all peaceful because it's so much healing is taking place during the prayer that it can bring up some turbulent emotions. So whether or not you feel peaceful can vary very much from session to session. You might think it's about having a spiritual experience. You don't need to repeat the word continuously. None of those things are things we do in the prayer. And we don't need to judge at the end of the period of centering prayer whether it was good or bad. The main thing is just, did you do it? If you did it, then you have made the space for the sacred to act within you. I'm afraid I'm not doing it right. What is it supposed to feel like? It doesn't feel like I'm doing anything. Well, after more than 20 years of doing this prayer, I still have that feeling all the time that I must not be doing it right because it doesn't feel like anything special, or I don't even know afterwards what happened. Well, David has this to say about that. Not realizing that you are praying means that God is praying, awakening in you. Not knowing that you are praying means that the workings of your intellectual mind are unknown or secret from your awareness and from the self who lives behind reflective thinking. So we're handing ourselves over in a way in this prayer to a deeply sacred and intuitive process that we're not completely in control of. And so we need to let go of the concern about doing it right and have a very deep trust that something is happening. By doing the prayer at all, it's often said you can't do it wrong. As long as you continue to sit there, you're doing it. Just by doing it, we're saying yes to God. And if we bring a deep trustfulness to that experience and just trust that what needs to happen is happening, it is. Another form that our trust takes is that there is a basic goodness of our own nature, a basic core of goodness, as Thomas Keating calls it, that is recognized in many, many traditions. I've given you some quotes here from Thomas Keating, who comes from the Christian tradition in which God created humankind and saw that we are good. We are good. That is our basic nature. So that's part of the Christian tradition. It's also part of the recovery tradition, and it's part of the Buddhist tradition. Chogyam Trungpa, who I've quoted there, is the founder of the Shambhala Buddhist method of meditation, and he's constantly coming back to our basic nature of goodness. And this basic goodness is something that you might even experience in your centering prayer, in a sense of simplicity and spaciousness, groundedness, just something you may taste and feel as part of your practice. But even if you don't, you can trust that it's something that is being cultivated in your practice. The fruits of centering prayer. Often people may not notice the fruits at first, and they may think that nothing is happening until the people around them start to reflect back to them that something is happening. That's often when people first discover that something is shifting. I've tried to talk about some of the fruits of centering prayer. There are many, many possible fruits, but I've tried to talk about some of them in the context of the Serenity Prayer, which is a prayer that I pray all the time, and I know that many of you are deeply familiar with. And if you're like me, you've learned that the acceptance, courage, and wisdom that the Serenity Prayer asks for are not things that you can get to through your thinking and your willing and your determination. It's a prayer because these are things that we cultivate in prayer and that come to us as gifts through our prayer. And some of the ways in which centering prayer cultivates these gifts is it makes us more likely to embrace this moment as it is so that we can accept our experience. It gives us the courage to let go of our illusions and some of our stories that we like to tell about ourselves that keep us trapped in certain patterns. And most mysteriously of all, it helps us to develop the wisdom to know what is ours to do, when we can change things and when we cannot. And the great Franciscan spiritual teacher, Richard Rohr, I think puts that very beautifully in this quote. Without inner transformation, there is no grounded or lasting reform or revolution. From a contemplative stance, you'll know what action is yours to do and what is not yours to do, almost naturally. To me, that's one of the most profound, mysterious, and important elements of centering prayer, is that it has helped me with that mysterious knowing, that deep inner knowing of what I need to do and what I can let go of. A deep intuition that I'm not quite sure how else you would cultivate it other than through a practice like this. So what's next? Practice 2 times a day for 20 or 30 minutes. That's the ideal. Of course, if you can't do that, start where you can. It can be very helpful to begin your day with centering prayer so you can start from a centered place. And that's also one of the best ways to make sure that time doesn't get away from you. If you've done at least one period first thing in the morning, then you're less likely to forget about it later on. I often try to do the second period right after lunch so that it gives me a new burst of energy and clarity in the afternoon. Sometimes if I think I need a nap or something to eat, I realize that it's actually centering prayer can give me the refreshment that I'm looking for. It's very helpful to just think carefully about what is a realistic way for you to practice. Where and when will you really be able to practice? Do you have enough space and silence at home to make that a reality? Do you need to get into your office a little bit earlier? What is your rhythm of what are your energy rhythms? What will make it possible for you to practice? You might want to talk to a friend about that if you're having trouble fitting it in. Just what is the way to make it really happen? Because if you imagine it, if you visualize it in a realistic way, then it's more likely to happen. Join a centering prayer group. Paradoxically, this is actually easier right now in the middle of the pandemic because there are so many fantastic online groups. Contemplative Outreach's Meditation Chapel, which many of you have probably experienced, has an enormous array of groups. I lead 2 groups on Tuesday and Wednesday evenings at 7 p.m. So if you're interested in those, just let me know. And many, many local groups have gone online. And so many people have experienced that there's a certain energy that comes from practicing in a group that not only can you feel while you're practicing, but it somehow seems to support your individual practice during the rest of the week if you can have that sense of connection with others. And then here are just a few reading suggestions for you. Open Mind, Open Heart by Thomas Keating is the great classic of the field. And if you haven't looked at that lately, it can be a wonderful thing to come back to. The Path of Centering Prayer by David Furnett, if you're particularly drawn to the practice of the sacred breath. He goes into a lot of detail about that. He has a whole chapter on that, and I really recommend that book for more experienced practitioners who want to go deeper. And my own book is written in very inclusive language, and it's very simple and concise. So finally, I'd just like to leave you with this quote that I sent you in the email about the deep refreshment of centering prayer. As I mentioned before, I think it's helpful to not think of it just as a dutiful thing that we have to check off our list, but something that we're offering ourselves as a gift that will help us and refresh us and renew us. We need to refresh ourselves at this deep level every day, just as we need exercise, food, rest, and sleep. So also we need moments of interior silence because they bring the deepest kind of refreshment. Now I can see you again. I wasn't able to figure out how to show my slides while seeing your faces at the same time, which I hate not being able to see you. So now I can see you again. It's nice to be with you again. So why don't we take a 5-minute break? I have that it's 2:42. So why don't we come back at around 2:47, and we'll sit down for a 20-minute period of centering prayer, and I'll lead you into it. And then we'll have, and I'll lead you out of it as well, going back to guideline 4. And then we'll have lots of time for questions and reflections and anything that's coming up for you. Sometimes people want to ask questions before the practice, but often the practice answers your questions. So we'll do the practice first. So now it's 2:43. So let's come back at 2:48. So see you in a minute. Okay, so let's prepare to practice for 20 minutes. So take your posture, keeping your back straight on a chair or a cushion or whatever's comfortable for you. If you need some extra back support, you might just take a moment to notice that. Now I often sit down on a chair with a cushion, but then I find I'd like to raise the cushion up and have it under behind my upper back and really sink into it. So just take the time to notice, what do you need to do to be comfortable, stable? Where's the best place for you to put your hands so that they can be comfortable for the whole 20 minutes without having to move them too much? Do you want to just rest them on your thighs? Would you like to clasp them in your lap? Would you like to fold your feet underneath you, cross-legged, or have your feet sitting flat on the floor? And you might just give yourself a body scan and just check in with the places where you know that you like to hold tension. I check my jaw, my neck, my shoulders, my hands. And if I can, I make some adjustments to be more comfortable. But I'll also mention that this is not, there are certain kinds of Buddhist meditation where you're not supposed to move a muscle the whole time. And this is not like that. If you find yourself becoming very uncomfortable and you think it would be helpful to just make a little shift, you just do that as simply as possible. You try to not to do it very much so that you're not constantly being distracted by it. But you do what you need to do to be comfortable. And then in the centering prayer tradition, we usually close our eyes gently. If you're not comfortable with that, you can keep them open in an unfocused gaze, just looking at a couple of feet in front of you. If you'd like, you could take a few deep breaths. Just notice what else you could let go of before we begin. You could just touch your emotional state and just notice it with your attention. How are you feeling? And if there's some aspect of that you can let go of, you can do that before you begin, or just acknowledge that it's there. And then once you've taken your posture, just take a moment to notice who God is for you right now. Whatever that might mean for you. A sense of mystery, gratitude, community, justice, darkness, absence, presence, confusion, oneness. Whatever it is, even if you don't understand it or like it, you could just touch it ever so gently with your attention and let go of it. And then when you're ready, you could just silently say to yourself your sacred word, or touch ever so gently with your attention, your breath. Just making contact with your sacred symbol, just reminding yourself that it's there. And when during the prayer session, you notice yourself becoming engaged with yourself, with your thoughts, tangled up in your thoughts, following your thoughts very carefully, more enmeshed with them than you need to be. You just use the sacred symbol, silently saying your sacred word or touching your sacred breath with your attention. You just lightly use it to disengage yourself again. It's almost like a bell ringing, calling you back to prayer, just reminding you to be present with God and not to follow your thoughts. Your thoughts can just be there, going by. But when you feel that you've become engaged with them, tangled in them, just ever so gently use your sacred symbol as much as you need to, but you don't need to use it all the time, just when there seems to be a particular need. So I'm going to set the timer for 20 minutes. Loving God, thank you for the gift of this time in your presence. When the timer goes off, this time of transition right after the prayer is very important. You've been letting go of thoughts. Now just let go and rest completely. Resting in God, in the sacred presence, whatever that means for you. And just notice, is there something that you're letting go of now that you could be letting go of during the meditation time? Some kind of effort that you've been making that isn't really necessary? Just notice and remember for your next session. And you could just ask yourself, what is the right way for you to use this time of transition so that you bring the energy of the centering prayer with you into your life? Would you like to offer the period of prayer to a particular person or a concern? Or would you like to visualize yourself in some activity in your daily life? Would you like to silently say to yourself the Lord's Prayer or the Serenity Prayer or some other beloved prayer? Would you like to just slowly open your eyes and your ears and just notice what's around you? Or maybe you'd like to just continue to rest completely.